So here is this poem titled Know Thyself from Dr. Haidas Chaudhry. The profound word of wisdom that rings through the ages declares unambiguously one supreme message. Know the secret of thyself, thy own inmost center. Discover in thy inner temple the world's greatest wonder. In one tiny atom is reflected the whole of matter. In one negligible drop is hidden the mystery of all water. In a single leaf of the tree is outlined its unique pattern. In a single line of book is contained its special design. So also is in every finite swell, dwelling the infinite supreme. In the inmost recess of the heart shines the eternal undimmed. To know the secret of the self is the master key to possess, to unlock the mysteries of being with sovereign ease and success. To discover the self of self is the master light to attain, that dispels all darkness and doubt, the lost harmony to regain. Deeper than intellect and ego, the self is the principle of unity, connecting man with man, each with all, is the bond of universality. Deeper than conscious and unconscious, the self is the center, superconscious, uniting man with God, part with the whole. It is the infinite's unique focus. To know the self is to discover the individual's unique mission, the purpose of the divine in life, and the secret of final fruition. So, thank you once again for joining, and happy Mother's Day. I dedicate this talk to the mother of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, my own mother, and Binadi, who was like a second mother to me. But before I begin the talk, let's have a brief meditation. I will play some music. We'll meditate collectively for about 5 minutes, and then I'll begin. So let me share the screen. I believe the Chaudhary sets the tone for this talk. When we talk about integral yoga psychology, of course, we point out to the statement of Sri Aurobindo where he says that yoga is nothing but practical psychology. Now, before we move from subjective to objective, and before we begin to understand and talk about the psychology of others, what is important is that we focus on ourselves. We focus on knowing ourselves. Yes, the, the divine is one, the divine is one consciousness, but this divine is manifesting in multiplicity. The divine is manifesting in different planes and subplanes of consciousness. And all these planes and subplanes of consciousness are present within us. They all are interacting with one another and they're influencing our psyche. The more we understand the different pieces of consciousness involved with all these planes of consciousness, the more we will be able to understand ourselves. That's the whole idea, and that is why I have started this series. Now, earlier, I have spoken quite a bit, upon on the topic of mind, the limitations of mind, you know, mind from the perspective of traditional Vedanta, and so on and so forth. I am taking the conversation a little deeper. And what I'm doing today is that I am going to specifically talk about the various types of mind that Sri Aurobindo has spoken about. Now, people who are familiar with the literature of Sri Aurobindo must have encountered terms like the outer self, the inner self, the subconscient, the subliminal, the superconscient, and so on and so forth. It's a very common complaint that we hear from people who are trying to grapple with Sri Aurobindo, that Sri Aurobindo is very difficult to understand. Yes, Sri Aurobindo can be very difficult to understand, but I think he becomes very simple when we start digging into the literature and start unpacking things. I've been unpacking his literature for some time, and I want to share things with you which are not there in the literature explicitly. Now, there is one very common distinction that we find in Sri Aurobindo. That is between inner self and outer self. What is inner self? What is outer self? What constitutes inner self and what constitutes outer self? Now, in order to understand this, we need to understand once again the process of involution and evolution. I've spoken about these processes. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but I'm going to present the same material in a different way so that we are able to understand the distinction between the inner self and the outer self. Now, the idea of evolution is very common. It is something which has taken center stage, and we all believe that evolution has taken place in cosmos. The evolution is occurring now also. Sri Aurobindo asked this fundamental question: what came before evolution? And then he gives this answer of involution. What is involution? Involution is the process in which the divine manifested itself in different planes down to what he calls inconscient, the plane of inconscience. The plane of inconscience is something where the divine completely involuted itself. It's that plane where the divine became the reverse of what it is in the plane of superconscience. In the plane of superconscience, what is divine? The divine is light. The divine is pure consciousness. The divine is wisdom, and so on and so forth. In inconscience, the same divine has become darkness and ignorance. The pure love, which it is at the plane of superconscience, has become the plane of disharmony and disintegration in the plane of inconscience. Now, it is from inconscience that evolution starts. Like the plane of superconscience, the plane of inconscience or the inconscient plane also is invisible. It cannot be accessed through the five senses. So, from the plane of inconscience, the plane of super subconscient or the subconscient plane emerges. We'll get into these definitions very shortly. And from that, matter comes into existence. And it is from matter that life develops, and from life develops the mind. In other words, we can say that the material plane, the vital plane, and the mental plane come into existence. Now, these planes, these planes that have come into existence through the process of evolution, basically form our outer nature, our outer consciousness, or the surface consciousness. However, we also need to understand that there were planes that were formed through the process of involution as well. When the divine, in the process of manifestation, was involuting itself. And when it was involuting itself, it also formed the mental plane, the vital plane, and the physical plane. And it is basically because of the existence of these planes that there was a pressure that was exerted on the process of evolution, because of which these planes came into quote unquote visible existence. So our inner self, this is something, this is an important point to note. Our inner self, our subliminal self, consists of planes that were formed during the process of involution. So, what is it that we have at this point in time? You know, we have two entities or two pieces of constitution: outer self or the surface self, and the inner self. The outer self coming into existence through the process of evolution, and the inner self coming into existence through the process of involution. Now, we all know that in the scheme of integral yoga, the divine is present within us. The divine is hiding in the cave of our heart. You know, behind the physical heart is the subliminal heart. And this is where the representative of the divine as psychic being resides. I've spoken about this, that the psychic being is very shy in nature, and the psychic being has to be given an invitation to come forward. And as it comes forward, what happens is that there is a greater correspondence between the outer self and the inner self. And as the psychic being comes forward, the outer self begins to get transformed. So, the physical plane, the vital plane, and the mental plane begin to get transformed and transmuted. This is the process. I've also remarked, a few times earlier, that while it is important to talk about the higher planes and different levels of the manifestation of the divine, it is also very important to talk about these lower planes, because this is where our struggle lies. These planes and subplanes and aspects of our consciousness are extremely involved in our own evolutionary process. Metaphorically speaking, as we try to go up further, as we try to evolve, these planes are constantly exerting a pressure in the reverse. Why? Because they have not been paid sufficient attention to. Another important aspect of integral yoga is that we have to transform these planes. We are not supposed to disconnect or dissociate. And when I say dissociate, I'm not talking about, dissociation in the manner in which it is used in psychology currently. We are not supposed to disconnect from these planes alone. We are supposed to transform them. And this transformation is important for the transformation in the world that we are seeking. So now that we have spoken about this distinction between the inner self and the outer self, let me tell you something about these terminologies that you find in Sri Aurobindo quite extensively, and how to wade through these terminologies. Sri Aurobindo uses the terms like pure mind, you know, physical mind, vital mind, mental physical, vital physical, vital, mental, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to untangle the complexity that is involved here, all that you need to do is basically take the three lower planes into account and put them into a 3 by 3 grid, as I have done here. When you create this 3 by 3 grid, consisting of mental, vital, physical, and on the other side, mental, physical, mental, vital, physical, you begin to get certain categories. And these are the categories that have been spoken about by Sri Aurobindo. We'll be going into those definitions further down the line. So what are these? When mental interacts with mental on the grid, you have pure mental. What is the characteristic of pure mental? Pure mental engages in thought and everything which is related to ideas. Pure mental within us is involved in the sheer pursuit of truth. We have discussed this earlier, that mind is not the right instrument for the pursuit of knowledge. We have discussed this, quite extensively. However, the pure mental in our mind, the pure mental subplane in our mind is involved in the pursuit of knowledge. It is involved in the pursuit of ideas. And if my own experiences can be taken into account, if pure mental is sufficiently engaged with, it can lead to the to the to the transcendence of mind. It can lead to the transcendence of the mental plane. It has that capacity. Now, you have this mental vital, consisting of two terms or you know, two subplanes, mental and vital. What is vital? Vital is that plane of existence within us which gives rise to sensations, desires, emotions, wants, and so on and so forth. It is the dynamic aspect of our being. It gives rise to the kinetic human. Now, this vital mind is not interested in the pursuit of knowledge. That is not what it does in us. On the contrary, it uses thoughts and ideas in the service of our will to power, domination, and so on and so forth. The politicians are very prone, to having this kind of mind. Pure mental, of course, you know, characterizes the thinkers and the philosophers and the creative people and so on and so on. Politicians, interestingly, do not have the predominant presence, mark my words very carefully. The predominant presence of pure mental. On the contrary, mental vital or vital mental is what is prominently present in them. And therefore, they use the world of ideas in the service of politics, power, domination, and so on and so forth. Then you have physical mental. The physical plane of our consciousness consists of tamas or indolence, inertia, laziness, and so on and so forth. Now, there are times, you know, when you will find that the mind does not want to move, it feels lazy, it does not want to inquire, it doesn't want to engage, you know, it wants to run away from the realm of thought, it does not want to listen to philosophical discussions and so on and so forth. Now, when that happens, it is basically the physical mind that is active in us. Today, what I'm going to do is that I am going to focus only on these three subplanes. The other ones we will take in the future, when I start discussing physical and vital in a greater manner. And as I said, all these pieces of understanding are basically windows to self understanding. When we start seeing their operation within ourselves, we get a greater handle in transforming ourselves. So, let me go into what Sri Aurobindo himself has written on these matters. And then, I will open the floor for discussions. This is what he says about the physical mind. The true thinking mind does not belong to the physical. It's a separate power. The physical mind is that part of the mind which is concerned with the physical things only. It depends on the sense mind, sees only objects, external actions, draws in ideas from the data given by external things, infers from them only and knows no other truth until it is enlightened from above. So the physical mind in us is also the objective, quote unquote, the objective mind in us. And if we will look into our own evolutionary process, we will find that till a certain point in time, the physical mind was massively operational in our own consciousness. We were interested in the things of the world, reading this encyclopedia, that encyclopedia, that atlas, and this scientific treatise, and so on and so forth. And then as we grow, we start looking within. When we start looking within, when we start inquiring within, the control of the physical mind begins to recede. It begins to go further and further into the background. It is not that that it stops exerting its control. That never happens. When we talk about all these planes, The focus is on predominance. It is not about exclusion. All these different planes are within us and they are active. It's a question of when they become active and when they become dormant, when they become latent and when they become manifest. In another letter uh, to his disciple, he says this about the physical mind. The physical mind is that which is fixed on physical objects and happenings, sees and understands these only and deals with them according to their own nature, but can with difficulty respond to higher forces. Now, this is something which is extremely important. Left to itself, it is skeptical of the existence of supraphysical things. It is it is skeptical of the existence of supraphysical things, of which it has no direct experience and to which it can find no clue. Even when it has spiritual experiences, it forgets them easily, loses the impression and result, and finds itself difficult to believe. In philosophical language, we will call this mind positivistic mind. You know, this mind has given birth to what we call positivism, which is even today massively dominant in the scientific pursuits. Only that is real which can be accessed through five senses. What cannot be accessed through five senses does not exist and is not even worth exploring. There you have it. This is positivism in a nutshell, and you can very clearly see the parallels or the correspondence between the physical mind and positivism. One more paragraph on the physical mind. That is the nature of the mental physical, to go on repeating without use the movement that has happened. It is what we call the mechanical mind. It is strong in childhood because the thinking mind is not developed and has, besides, a narrow range of interests. Afterwards, it becomes an undercurrent in the mental activities. Question, for us to ponder on. Is this mind that gets active in OCD? Is this the kind of mind that gets active in some autistic children? I don't know. The current psychological knowledge also does not have does not have an understanding of this. But is it possible that that it is basically this aspect of our mental consciousness which becomes highly operative or operational in these two conditions that I spoke about, OCD as well as you know some aspects of autism? Let's come to the vital mind. There's a part of the nature which I have called the vital mind. The function of this mind is not to think and reason, to perceive, consider, and find out or value things. For that is the function of thinking mind proper, buddhi. For people who are participating for the first time, I will send to them, you know, my talks that I have given on this platform on mind, buddhi, and so on and so forth. They will be able to catch up. But to plan or dream or imagine what can be done. I'm underlining this. But to plan or dream or imagine what can be done. It makes formations for the future, which the will can try to carry out if opportunity and circumstances become favorable, or even it can work to make them favorable. It is the dynamic mind. It is not interested in pure thought. It is not interested in pure ideas. It is not interested in abstract ideas. It is interested in using the ideas in the service of what can be done in this world. You can say it is the doing mind instead of, the thinking mind. In men of action, this faculty is prominent and a leader of their nature. Great men of action always have it in a very high measure. But even if one is not a man of action or practical realization, or if circumstances are not favorable, or one can do only small and ordinary things, this vital mind is there. It acts in them on a small scale, or if it needs some sense of largeness, what it does very often is to plan in the void, knowing that it cannot realize its plans, or else to imagine big things, stories, adventures, great doings in which oneself is the hero or the creator. I wonder if we can call it the non-creator mind. You know, I read his tales long time ago. I'm not sure if the correspondence is right, but it's quite possible that it is the non-creator mind. One more, and then I will switch to the thinking mind. The vital mind is that part of the vital being which builds, plans, imagines, arranges things and thoughts according to the life pushes, desires, will to power or possession. You remember, we had spoken about this earlier. I'm repeating this portion. Arranges things and thoughts according to the life pushes, desires, will to power or possession, will to action, emotion, vital ego reactions of the nature. It must be distinguished from the reasoning will, which plans and arranges things according to the dictates of the thinking mind proper, the discriminating reason, or according to the mental intuition or a direct insight and judgment. The vital mind uses thought. This is extremely important. The vital mind uses thought for the service not of reason, but of life push and life power. And when it calls in reasoning, it uses that for justifying the dictates of these powers, imposes their dictates on the reason instead of governing by a discriminating will the action of life forces. It uses the mind, or reasoning in the service of the agenda that it has already put forth. You'll find many researchers doing this. They already have a fixed agenda, they know what they want to do. And then they start looking for the data. It's not the data which is leading them to a conclusion, it is their conclusions which basically help them finding the data. There are a lot of people, of such kind in the world. This insight, in my understanding, is very important for therapists and professors. Few sentences on the thinking mind, and then I'll stop, because it seems that we are going to have questions. But there's still another clearer reflective mentality behind the dynamic and vital, which is capable of escaping from this absorption in life and views itself as assuming life and body in order to emerge out in active relations of energy that make that that which it perceives in will and thought. It is the source of the pure thinker in us. It is that which knows mentality in itself and sees the world not in terms of life and body, but of mind. It is that which, when we get back to it, we sometimes mistake for the pure spirit as we mistake the dynamic mind for the soul. The higher mind is able to perceive and deal with other souls as forms of its pure self. It is capable of sensing them by pure mental impact and communication, and no longer only by vital and nervous impact and physical indications. It conceives too a mental figure of unity, and in its activity and its will, it can create and possess more directly, not only indirectly, as in the ordinary physical life, and in other minds and lives as well as its own. But even this pure mentality does not escape from original error of mind. For it is still its separate mental self, which it makes the judge, witness, and the center of the universe, and through it alone strives to arrive at its own higher self and reality. All others are others grouped to it around itself. When it wills to be free, it has to draw back from life and mind in order to disappear into the real unity. For there is still the veil created by avidya between the mental and supramental action. An image of the truth gets through, not the truth itself. For the human thinking mind, there are always many sides to everything, and it decides according to its own bent or preference. This is a particular characteristic of the thinking mind that we need to take notice of. It decides according to its own bent or preference or to its habitual ideas or some reason that presents itself to the intellect as the best. It gets the real truth only when something else puts a higher light into it, when the psychic or the intuition touches it and makes it feel or see. What I want to emphasize as I close is that there are many nuggets of wisdom and important pieces of knowledge and information which we can use from Sri Aurobindo in order to transform ourselves. I personally feel that, that it's a pity that he has been categorized as a guru. He should be looked into, or rather, he should be looked as a philosopher, or a scientist of the invisible world. We should be treated as we treat other psychologists and thinkers. And when we look at him from this particular perspective, we gain some very important insights. So my idea is that we do not need to look into his writings as the writing coming from a guru or a spiritual figure, but as an individual who has some very important insights to share, from which we can derive self knowledge for our own transformation and transmutation. So that said, the floor is open. Thank you. I wanted to read a few things about inconscient and subconscient, but I see that it's already 11:53, and I feel that it will be probably better to have discussions than go into a few more sentences of Sri Aurobindo. I have given, you know, a fairly good idea of what the inconscient plane is all about, or what the subconscient does in us. I will revisit this, as I said, as part of a series. I have a plan around this. I spoke about the mind. I spoke about the limitations of the mind. I spoke about the mind, from the traditional perspective. I spoke about how Sri Aurobindo incorporated, those traditional understandings, and how, he developed his own ideas. Now is the time to get deeper into the planes and the subplanes and talk about what Sri Aurobindo means with these things. And as I said, if you would remember that 3 by 3 grid that I spoke about, all these different terms, pure mental, physical mental, vital mental, you know, vital physical, and so on and so forth, will become very easy to understand. So thank you very much. Thoughts, ideas, comments? Yes, Lou.
I appreciate the way that you put these in understandable terms and to make things a little more simple for to grasp. And it just one thing really struck me as, and maybe you could review that about how the influence the inner self and the psychic can have on the outer nature. But I know that takes a long time, but it's something that's really important, I think, and I I want to understand it better and how to, I mean, I feel it, at times, but I think it's real important to make that more real, you know. I mean, because I like this approach that you have of making it real for us, for our own inner experiences. We have to understand these things. It's not easy, but go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you for that question, Lou. So, I'll have a series on the psychic being as well.
Okay.
Um, so, there'll be more things to discuss. What Sri Aurobindo and the mother exactly mean by the psychic being. How they differentiate the psychic being from the soul, or how they differentiate the psychic being, uh, from the understanding of Jivatma, and so on and so forth. One of the best ways to bring the psychic forward is to basically surrender oneself to the divine. It's very simple and very difficult simultaneously. You know, if one is able to surrender oneself to the divine, if one is able to give oneself to the divine as seamlessly as possible, as unconditionally as possible, we enhance the chances of the psychic coming forward. You know, and when I say unconditionally, in those times, we should not be putting conditions on the divine. We are not surrendering because we want this or that. Surrendering for the sheer joy of surrendering to the divine. You know, when surrendering is the process as well as the objective in relationship to the divine. You know, surrendering just for the sake of surrendering, not because what we are going to get out of that process, though, the divine gives in abundance. That also is true.
But then that's not surrendering. I mean, that's asking
Right.
in return.
It's something like when one falls in love. Pure love is when we do not expect anything from the other. We just want to give, and that's it. If we have experienced this in life, you know,
But we always have to do our part, right?
that's right.
We can't expect the divine to do everything. We have our work we have to do.
Surrendering is the work.
Yeah.
Surrendering is not easy. It
No,
requires work. It's not easy.
no,
You know,
no.
different aspects of our being come into existence, doubts, fears, and so on and so forth. There's so many things that happen.
Oh, all the human nature, right?
That's right.
Poses it.
That's right. But as one begins to give more and more to the divine, you know,
Yes.
the psychic begins to come forward. And as it begins to come forward, our lower nature begins to get transformed. The influence of the physical mind on our consciousness begins to recede. You know, the the influence of the vital mind, which in my understanding is deeply problematic, also begins to recede. We begin to understand the limitations, of pure mental. We gain the capacity of silencing our mind. We gain the capacity of going beyond thoughts. And we also gain the capacity of living in the presence of the divine. You know, But I will definitely have, a series on the psychic being. There will be others also, who will be
Thank you.
speaking on this topic. These are very important topics. I must say we have not emphasized on the writings of Sri Aurobindo enough. And my understanding is it is because we put him in the category of a guru, something, which he himself quite detested. He never wanted to be a guru. He never was a guru.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your question.
Oh, I had a comment. It's a very complex topic for me, but I really appreciate your careful explanation of the planes of the mind. And I am very interested to hear more about the development of the psychic being and how that collaborates with the transformation of the planes of the mind. I also have a great appreciation for the intellect of Sri Aurobindo. So as much as I love my Savitri group, I really get a lot out of this too. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll have a discussion on psychic being very shortly.
I have a question, Kundan.
Yes, Mira, please.
Few things. I would like to. Remember you mentioning there's a book about explaining all these terms, Sri Aurobindo's terms. Is that correct?
Ah, there. I wouldn't say that there's one particular book, but there's quite a bit here.
Could you
That's
could
the
you
help
send
of
it
it.
in the chat or somewhere to us when you send it? Because I can't see what you're showing here.
Yeah, it's called, a greater psychology. Uh,
I just want to know the terms. I guess that's where I'm lost.
right.
Who's the author, by the way?
The editor is A.S. Dalal.
What is it called again?